The auctioneer shoved Ruth Ella Dawson so hard she dropped to her knees on the platform. 310 pounds hit the pine boards and the whole structure cracked down the middle. Her daughters screamed. The crowd roared with laughter, and Fergus Bligh stood over her, wiping his hands on his coat like he'd touched something rotten. "Get up," he said. "Nobody's buying you on the ground." She couldn't get up. She couldn't breathe. And the price for her life had just dropped to $2. Less than a sack of flour in Copper Bend, Montana. But the scarred giant, watching from the back of the crowd, wasn't laughing. He was counting his coins. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Ruth's story reaches. Hit subscribe, follow this channel, and stay until the very end. You won't believe where this goes. Ruth tasted blood and dirt. Her palms burned where the splinters bit in, and the July sun hit the back of her neck like a brand.
"Mama!"
Opal's voice, high and terrified, cutting through the laughter.
"Mama, get up!"
"Stay there, Opal." Clementine's voice now, hard as iron. "Don't you move." Ruth pushed herself up, slow, every pound of her fighting gravity and shame in equal measure. Her one good dress, the flour sack one she'd patched 11 times, had torn at the shoulder. Sweat ran down her back. The crowd watched the way people watched a lame horse trying to stand, curious whether it would make it, not caring either way. "There we are." Fergus clapped his hands. "On her feet, gentlemen. Strong as an ox, this one." "Built like one, too," someone hollered. Laughter. Always laughter. Ruth locked her jaw and found her daughters in the crowd. Clem had both arms clamped around Bertie and Opal, her 14-year-old face carved from the same stone Ruth had learned to wear. Bertie, 9 years old, clutched that corn-husk doll she'd carried since Missouri, and Opal, 5, pressed Captain the rag doll against her chest and stared at her mother with eyes that understood nothing and everything. 3 days since they'd eaten real food. 8 months since Hector drowned in 2 feet of creek water, drunk and useless to the last. 3 weeks since the landlord threw them out. And now this. A pine platform in the middle of Copper Bend's main street, July heat turning the dirt to griddle, and Ruth standing up there like livestock at a county fair. "Do I hear $10? Fergus circled her, that weasel smile working overtime. "Cook, laundress, strong constitution. She'll outwork any man here." Silence. $6 then. "Come on, boys. She's a bargain." "Bargain?" A rancher near the front spat tobacco into the dust. "My mule eats half as much, and don't break wagons climbing in." More laughter. Ruth's nails cut into her palms so deep she felt blood. $5. Surely someone needs a—" "Take the girls instead." A voice from the middle of the crowd, lazy, amused. "Least they ain't ruined yet." Every sound stopped. Ruth saw it happen. Saw the heads turn toward the porch where her daughters stood. Saw the way certain men's eyes changed, went calculating, went hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. And something inside Ruth Ella Dawson, something that had survived Hector's fists and poverty's grinding teeth and the slow death of every dream she'd ever held, caught fire. "You look at my daughters again," she said, her voice carrying across the square with a force that surprised even her. "And I will come off this platform and tear your throat out with my bare hands." Dead silence. "Now," Fergus said quickly, his smile cracking like cheap paint. "The girls aren't part of this auction. Just the woman. $4. Do I hear $4? $4? The voice came from the left side of the crowd. Cool, pleasant. The kind of voice that belonged in a courtroom. Ruth turned and saw him. Silver white hair, expensive coat despite the heat. A face carved by decades of getting exactly what he wanted. Beside him, a younger man, late 20s, handsome in a way that made Ruth's stomach clench. Blue eyes, but wrong. Empty. Like somebody had scooped out whatever was supposed to be behind them. Judge Ambrose Kell, Fergus brightened like a lamp, with a bid of $4. For the full household, the judge added pleasantly. The woman and her children. The children aren't. The children go where the mother goes, Mr. Bly. That's territory law. I should know. He smiled. I wrote most of it. Ruth's blood went cold. A judge. The kind of man who didn't just have money. He had the law itself in his pocket, signed and stamped and perfectly legal. Father, the younger man touched the judge's arm. Let me handle this. Of course, Leland. Leland Kell stepped forward, and the crowd gave him room the way you'd give room to a snake that hadn't decided whether to strike. He looked up at Ruth with those empty eyes and smiled. Mrs. Dawson, I'm sorry for your circumstances. My family has a large household. Your girls would be educated, fed, clothed. You'd have honest work and fair treatment. And what would you want in return? Ruth asked. Loyalty. Leland's smile didn't change. Gratitude. The things any employer expects. Ruth looked at his hands. Clean. Soft. The hands of a man who'd never worked, but had made others work plenty. She looked at his eyes again and saw what lived behind that emptiness. Patience. The patient hunger of a man who collected things and kept them. No, she said. Leland blinked. Excuse me? I said no. Mrs. Dawson, I don't think you understand your $2. The new voice hit the square like a rock dropped into still water. Low, rough, dragged up from somewhere deep in a man's chest. Every head turned toward the livery stable. He stood in the shadow where the awning cut the July sun. Tall enough that the shadow barely covered him, wide enough that the awning post looked thin beside his shoulders. Dark clothes, dark hat pulled low, and a face like someone had started carving a mountain and quit halfway through. Hard jaw, sharp cheekbones, a scar running from his left temple down past his ear, and eyes the color of a winter river. Pale gray-blue, cold, absolutely unreadable. $2, he said again, stepping into the sunlight. His boots hit the dirt with a sound that had weight to it. For the woman's contract, girls go free. Mr. Hale, Fergus licked his lips. We have a standing bid of $4 from Judge Kell. I heard his bid. Josiah Hale stopped 10 feet from the platform. Up close, the scar was worse. Rough, ragged, old. His hands hung at his sides, scarred across every knuckle, and he held himself with the coiled stillness of a man who'd learned exactly how much damage he could do, and had decided, for now, not to do it. I'm offering $2 for the labor contract. 1 year. Housekeeping. The girls aren't part of any contract. They're free citizens traveling with their mother. That's not how this works, Leland said. Section 12, paragraph 4. Josiah didn't look at him. Minor children of contracted laborers remain under parental custody unless a court rules otherwise. That's territory law. Now he looked at Judge Kell. You did write it, didn't you, Judge? Something passed between the two men. Ruth couldn't read it, but she felt it. Old history, old anger, the kind of tension that came from men who'd crossed each other before and remembered exactly how it went. You've been reading law books, Josiah, Judge Kell said pleasantly. That's new. Man gets bored in the hills. $5, Leland cut in, for the full household. There is no full household. Josiah's voice didn't rise. There's a woman and her free children. Bid on the contract or walk away. You're offering less than my son, Mr. Hale. Judge Kell spread his hands. Surely the lady deserves the higher price. The lady deserves not to have her daughter sold to a man who collects people. Josiah said it flat, matter of fact, and the crowd went dead silent. Leland's empty eyes filled with something sudden and dangerous. You want to say that again? I'll say it as many times as you need to hear it. Leland's hand moved toward his hip. Josiah didn't move at all, didn't shift, didn't tense. Just stood there with his hands open at his sides and those cold eyes locked on Leland like he was measuring the distance to a target. Leland, Judge Kell's voice was quiet. Not here. The younger man's hands stopped. His jaw worked. Then he stepped back, and Ruth watched him swallow whatever violence he'd been about to commit. Let him have her, Judge Kell said. At that price, he's welcome to his purchase. Father, I said let him have her. The judge settled his hat and smiled at Josiah. That patient, terrible smile.
Enjoy your investment, Hale. I hope it brings you everything you deserve.
He turned and walked away. Leland followed after a look at Ruth that made her skin crawl. Not anger, not lust. Ownership. The look of a man marking something he intended to come back for. Ruth's legs were shaking. She turned to Josiah. Why? Why what? Why $2? Why me? Why do you care what happens to my girls? Josiah pulled $2 silver from his coat and laid them in Fergus's palm. Sign the contract, Mrs. Dawson. Answer my question. Sign the contract, and I'll answer on the road. Fergus produced the papers, already sweating through them. Ruth stared at the words she couldn't read and felt the familiar shame of it. A grown woman who couldn't make sense of marks on paper. Clem, she called. Her daughter was there in seconds, slipping through the crowd like smoke. Josiah looked at the girl, then pulled the contract from Fergus's hands and held it out to her. Read it, he said. All of it. Clem took the paper. Her gray eyes moved line by line, and Ruth watched her daughter's face the way you'd watch a doctor's face during an examination, looking for the flinch, the tightening, the sign that something was wrong. 1 year, Clem said. Housekeeping and cooking, room and board for all 4 of us. Nothing about the girls working, nothing about physical discipline, nothing about extensions without consent. She looked up at Josiah. Who put those protections in? I wrote them in this morning. Gave Fergus the amended contract before the auction started. Clem stared at him. You planned this. I planned to make sure whoever signed that contract had protections. I didn't plan on it being your mother. Liar, Clem said calmly. You came here with exactly $2 and a contract you'd already written. You knew exactly who you were buying. Something shifted in Josiah's face. Not guilt. Respect. Your daughter reads people as well as she reads paper, he said to Ruth. Better, Ruth said. She gets it from me. She took the pen and made her mark. Josiah signed below it in hard, angular script that looked like it had been cut into the page. Get your things, he said. We don't have things. That hit him. Ruth saw it. A flicker across those cold eyes, fast as lightning, gone just as quick. He nodded once. Then let's go. They walked to the wagon. Ruth felt every stare on her back like a lit match. Josiah lifted Opal up first. You're really tall, Opal told him. Yes. Are you a giant? No. Captain thinks you are. Captain's entitled to his opinion. He reached for Bertie. She flinched backward, pressing against Ruth's hip. He's all right, sweetheart, Ruth murmured. Bertie shook her head, didn't speak, just clutched her corn-husked doll tighter and stared at Josiah's scarred hands with wide eyes. Josiah crouched down. The movement was slow, deliberate, keeping his hands visible. "I'm going to lift you into the wagon," he said quietly. "That's all. I'll let go the second your feet touch the boards. Okay?" Bertie looked at his hands, then at his face. Then, very softly, "Your hands are hurt." "They're old scars. They don't hurt anymore." "Do they hurt other people?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Josiah was quiet for a long moment. "They used to," he said. "Not anymore." Bertie studied him with the terrifying honesty of a 9-year-old. Then she held out her arms. Josiah lifted her, gentle as handling glass, and set her in the wagon. His hands released her instantly. Clem climbed up on her own, refused his hand without a word. Ruth stood by the wagon's edge. The step was there, iron, bolted solid. She gripped the wood and hauled herself up, arms shaking, sweat running, face burning with the knowledge that everyone in this street was watching the fat woman struggle. The wagon groaned. She made it, sat down hard on the hay-covered boards, and pulled her daughters against her sides. Josiah climbed onto the driver's bench and picked up the reins. He paused, didn't turn around. "The ranch is 20 miles north," he said. "Bitterroot foothills. No neighbors for 5 miles. You'll work hard, but you'll eat every day. You'll have beds and locked doors. And nobody will touch you or those girls as long as you're under my roof." "Pretty speech," Clem said. "Heard plenty like it before." "I know you have." Josiah snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe it. I'm asking you to watch and decide for yourself." Copper Bend fell away behind them. The laughter, the auction platform, the judge's patient smile, Leland's empty eyes, all of it shrinking into dust and distance as the wagon rolled north into the foothills. The road climbed. Sage gave way to juniper, then ponderosa pine.
The July heat eased as they gained altitude, but Ruth's dress was still soaked through, sticking to her back and her thighs and every fold of her body. Flies followed the horses. Dust coated everything. "You said you'd answer on the road," Ruth said after an hour. "Why me?" Josiah didn't turn. "I was in town for supplies. Heard about the auction. Went to watch." "That's not an answer." "I saw the Kells bidding on a woman with 3 daughters. I know what the Kells do with people they own." "What do they do?" "They use them until there's nothing left to use. Then they discard them." Ruth's arms tightened around Opal, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder. "And you're different." "Yes." "Every man says that." "I know." "So why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't. Not yet." He adjusted the reins. "Give it a week. If I'm lying, you'll know." "And if you're telling the truth?" "Then you'll know that too." Clem leaned forward. "What's the Kells' problem with you?"
"That's a long story. We've got an hour." Josiah was quiet. The wagon rocked over stones. Wind moved through the pines and carried the smell of hot resin and dust. "Judge Kell wants my land," he said finally. "My ranch sits on the only year-round water source in the Upper Valley. Whoever controls that water controls every ranch for 30 miles. "So sell it to him," Clem said. "No." "Why not?" "Because I built it for someone, and selling it would mean they never existed." The words fell into the wagon like something fragile breaking. Clem opened her mouth, then closed it. Even she knew when to stop pushing. The ranch appeared as the sun tilted toward the western peaks. Ruth saw it and felt something she didn't expect. Not relief, not hope. Recognition. Like she was looking at a place that had been waiting for someone to come back. Two-story house. Dark wood. Stone chimney. A porch with a rocking chair that had a cushion on it. A woman's touch. Still there after whoever had placed it was gone. The barn behind, big and solid. Corrals. Chicken coop. Root cellar built into the hillside. Everything neat. Everything maintained. Everything empty of the life it had been built to hold. Josiah stopped the wagon. "Home," he said, and the word sounded like something he'd practiced saying and still couldn't get right. He lifted Opal down. She woke up, looked around, and said, "It's big." "It's a ranch." "Captain wants to see the chickens." "Chickens are in the coop around back." Birdie was already climbing down, her eyes fixed on the coop. She stopped halfway. "Are there cats?" "Barn cat, orange tabby. Mean as sin, but she won't bite if you leave her alone." Birdie took off running. "Birdie!" Ruth called. "Let her go," Josiah said. "Nothing out there'll hurt her." Clem dropped from the wagon and immediately started walking the perimeter, testing fences, checking sight lines, counting steps to the tree line. Ruth watched her and ached. Josiah offered his hand. Ruth ignored it, found the iron step, and climbed down on her own. Her knees screamed. Her back screamed louder. But she made it to the ground without falling, and that was enough. Inside, the house was clean the way a church is clean. Scrubbed, maintained, holy in its emptiness. Ruth's eyes swept the kitchen and cataloged everything. Cast iron stove, good condition. Water pump, working. Cabinets stocked with enough food for months. A sewing basket in the corner with good scissors, needles, thread in a dozen colors. A woman's sewing basket. 2 bedrooms upstairs, Josiah said. Mine's down here. Take whichever rooms you want. Whose house was this? Ruth asked. Mine. Whose home was this? The distinction landed. Josiah's jaw tightened. My wife's. Sarah. She died 5 years ago. Our son Ezra, too. Typhus. He said it flat, like reading from a list. Name, cause, date. No emotion. But Ruth saw his hands, those scarred, massive hands, and they were shaking. Just barely. Just enough. I'm sorry, she said. There's stew from yesterday. I'll cook. You just... Mr. Hale, I've been hungry for 3 days, and I'm standing in a kitchen with food in it. Let me cook. He stepped aside. Ruth moved through the kitchen like water finding its level, found the stew, tasted it, added salt and onion, cut bread, pumped water. Her hands knew this work the way her lungs knew breathing. Automatic, essential. The one thing she'd always been good at that nobody could take away. Girls, she called from the door. Dinner! Birdie came running with the orange barn cat draped over her shoulders like a scarf. The cat looked murderous. Birdie looked ecstatic. Mama, her name is Cleopatra. Her name's ugly, Josiah said from behind Ruth. That's mean. Her name is Cleopatra and she loves me. She doesn't love anyone. She tolerates people who feed her. She loves me. Birdie sat down at the table, with the cat still on her shoulders, and a look of absolute certainty that dared anyone to argue. Ruth saw Josiah's face do something complicated. His jaw softened. His eyes went somewhere far away. Then he blinked, and it was gone. Opal climbed into a chair. Captain's hungry too. Captain doesn't eat, Clem said, sliding into the seat nearest the door. He's made of rags. He eats invisible food. That's not enough, Ruth said. She set 5 bowls on the table. Josiah stared at the 5th one. I wasn't. You eat at this table, or I eat at this table, Mr. Hale. Pick one.
Because we're not both standing. He sat. They ate in silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then Bertie looked down at her bowl, stopped chewing, and went very still. "Bertie?" Ruth reached for her. "It's warm," Bertie whispered. Her eyes were filling. "Mama, it's warm, and there's pieces of real potato in it."
"I know, sweetheart. I forgot what warm food tasted like." Bertie's voice cracked. One tear slid down her cheek and fell into the stew. "I forgot, Mama." Ruth pulled her daughter against her chest and held her while she cried. Opal kept eating, unfazed. Clem stared at her bowl with a jaw set hard enough to shatter. And Josiah, across the table, stood up quietly and walked out of the kitchen. The front door opened and closed. Ruth found him on the porch 10 minutes later, after she'd gotten Bertie calm and the girls eating again. He was leaning against the railing, his back to her, and his shoulders were doing something she recognized. She didn't mention it, just stood beside him and looked at the mountains going dark against the sky. "Your son," she said quietly. "Ezra. How old?" 3. His voice was rough. He'd be 8 now. "Same age as Bertie." Josiah didn't answer. Didn't need to. Ruth understood what had happened at that table. Why he'd walked out. Why his shoulders had broken their rigid line. Why a man who'd probably killed people couldn't sit across from a hungry 9-year-old crying over warm stew. "The locks on the bedroom doors," she said. "You installed them yourself." "Yes." "For Sarah?" "For whoever came after. I always figured I'd hire help eventually. Wanted them to feel safe." "That's either the most thoughtful thing a man's ever done, or the most calculated." "Can it be both?" Ruth almost smiled. Almost. "Good night, Mr. Hale." "Good night, Mrs. Dawson. Lock your doors." "I intend to." She went upstairs, got the girls into nightshirts from the cedar trunk, soft flannel that smelled like lavender and ghosts. Opal was asleep in seconds, Captain tucked under her chin. Bertie curled around Cleopatra the cat, who had apparently decided this particular human was acceptable. Clem tested the window. "Opens easy. Porch roof's right below." 10-foot drop to the ground. "Clem, I'm just being careful." Clem pulled back the curtain an inch and looked out. "He's on the porch again, sitting in the dark." "He'll be there all night." "How do you know?" "Because that's what men do when they're standing guard." Ruth paused. "Your father never did it. But men who actually care, they sit in the dark and watch for trouble." "He could be trouble." "He could be." "But you don't think so." Ruth sat on Clem's bed.
"I think he's a man who built a house for a family that died and has been living inside their ghost for 5 years. I think buying my contract today was the first thing he's done for a living person since he buried them. And I think that scares him more than the Kells or anything else in this territory." Clem was quiet for a long time. Then, "Bertie likes him." "Bertie likes the cat. She tolerates him."
Same thing coming from Bertie. Clem lay down, still fully dressed, still ready to run.
"Mama? Yes? If he turns out to be like Papa, I won't just threaten. I need you to know that." "I know that."
"Good." Clem rolled over. "Good night." Ruth crossed to her room. The narrow bed, the handmade quilt, the lavender-scented air. She lay down and listened. Opal breathing, Bertie humming to the cat, Clem's deliberate silence. And below, the creak of the porch under a man who'd paid $2 for a woman he didn't know and brought her to a house full of everything he'd lost. She closed her eyes. Her daughters were fed. They were sheltered. They were behind locked doors in a dead woman's nightshirts. And tomorrow would bring work and questions and the shadow of Judge Kell's patient smile. But tonight, Ruth's eyes snapped open. A sound. Outside. Not the wind, not the horses. Something else. She went to the window and looked down at the porch. Josiah was on his feet, his hand on the rifle leaning against the wall, his body angled toward the southern road. And there, maybe a mile out, barely visible against the dark hillside, a light. Steady and orange. A lantern or a torch, held by someone who wanted to be seen. Someone who'd followed them. Someone standing on the road between the ranch and Copperbend, making sure Josiah knew they were there. The light held for 10 seconds. Then it went out. Josiah didn't move for a long time. Then he picked up the rifle, walked off the porch into the darkness, and disappeared. Ruth stood at the window, her heart slamming against her ribs, and stared at the empty place where he'd been. The night pressed in. The mountains held their silence. And somewhere between this house and the town where she'd been sold for $2, someone was watching, waiting, and making plans that Ruth couldn't see and couldn't stop. She didn't sleep, not for a long time. And when she finally did, it wasn't peace that carried her under. It was exhaustion, pure and simple. The body's surrender when the mind refused to quit. Her last thought before the darkness took her was the same word, repeated like a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. Safe. They were safe. For now. Ruth was standing at the stove when Josiah came through the back door at dawn. She'd been up for an hour, couldn't sleep past the first gray light, and had found coffee and a skillet and put both to work, because waiting in silence would have killed her faster than anything on that road. He stopped when he saw her. Dirt on his boots, rifle in his hand, a scratch across his jaw that hadn't been there last night. "You're bleeding," Ruth said. "Branch." He set the rifle by the door. "You're up early." "I don't sleep when strange lights appear on roads in the middle of the night." She poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the table, hard. "Sit down." "Mrs. Dawson, sit down." He sat. Ruth stood across the table with her arms crossed and 310 pounds of anger she'd been building since 2 a.m. "Who was out there?" "Nobody by the time I got there." "That's not what I asked. Who was out there?" Josiah wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. Those massive, scarred hands that had trembled last night when Bertie cried over warm stew. They weren't trembling now. "Kell's men. 2 riders. They turned back when they saw me coming." "How do you know they were Kell's?" "Because the Kell brand was on their horses, and they ride like men who get paid, whether they work or not." Ruth's stomach dropped. "They followed us from town." "They didn't follow you. They already knew where I live. They were sending a message." "What message?" "That they know you're here. That they can reach this place whenever they want." Josiah drank his coffee like a man who'd had this conversation with himself 100 times already. It's what the judge does. He doesn't attack first. He reminds you he can. And you just walked out into the dark, alone, with a rifle, to meet them. Yes. What if there'd been 10 of them? There weren't. What if there had been? Josiah looked at her, those winter river eyes, flat and calm. Then we'd be having a different conversation. Ruth wanted to hit him. Wanted to grab that coffee cup and throw it against the wall and scream that she'd just gotten her daughters fed and sheltered and safe for the first time in months. And he was out there playing target practice in the dark like his life didn't matter. Like he didn't understand that if something happened to him, she and those girls had nothing. No contract, no protection, no roof. Nothing except the road back to Copper Bend and whatever the Kells had waiting. But she didn't scream. She'd learned a long time ago that screaming at men accomplished exactly nothing. So she poured her own coffee and sat down across from him. "I need you to stop treating me like a guest," she said. "I don't, you do. You walk out at 2 a.m. without a word. You come back bleeding and tell me nothing. You answer my questions with the least amount of truth you can get away with." Ruth leaned forward. "I signed a contract, Mr. Hale. 1 year. That means my life and my daughter's lives are tied to yours, whether either of us likes it. So if someone's watching this ranch, I need to know about it. If someone's planning something, I need to know about it. If you're going to get yourself killed on a dark road, I need to know about it before it happens, not after." Josiah was quiet for a long time. The coffee cooled between his hands. Outside, a rooster crowed, and the barn cat, Cleopatra apparently, yowled at something in the yard. "Judge Kell has been trying to buy this ranch for 3 years, he said finally. "The water rights. Whoever owns this property controls the only creek that runs year-round in the Upper Valley. Without it, every ranch north of Copper Bend dries up by August." "So sell him the water rights and keep the land." "Can't. Territory law bundles water rights with the property. Sell one, sell both." "Then why doesn't he just take it? If he's a judge, he's got the power." "Because I've got a clear deed, a filed claim, and a reputation that makes lawyers nervous." Josiah's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something darker. "The judge is patient. He doesn't grab. He squeezes. Raises my taxes, sends inspectors, files complaints about my fences, my cattle, my water usage. Death by paperwork. And now? Now he's got something new. You." Josiah met her eyes. "A woman under my roof. Children. That changes his math. Before, the worst he could do was make my life miserable. Now he's got leverage." The word hit Ruth like cold water. "My daughters are not leverage." "I know that, but the Kells don't think like you. They think like men who've never been told no. To them, your girls are pressure points, buttons to push, things to threaten until I give them what they want." "Then send us away." The words tasted like poison, but Ruth said them. "Send us back to town. Find someone else. Don't give them—" "And where would you go?" Silence. "Back to the chicken coop?" Josiah's voice was quiet. Not cruel, just honest. "Back to starving? Back to another auction where the Kells are the highest bidder, and this time I'm not there to stop them." "That's not your problem." "It became my problem when I put $2 on that platform." He stood, taking his coffee to the sink. "You're staying, the girls are staying, and the Kells are going to learn that this ranch has more on it now than cattle and ghosts." "Ghosts?" Ruth said. Josiah's back was to her. She watched his shoulders tighten. Figure of speech. "No, it wasn't." He turned around. "Your daughters are waking up. I can hear the little one talking to that rag doll through the ceiling. I'll be in the barn." "Mr. Hale." "Work starts today, Mrs. Dawson. For both of us." He grabbed his hat and was out the door before she could stop him. Ruth sat at the table and drank her coffee and thought about water rights and patient judges and a man who'd built a house for ghosts and was slowly learning to share it with the living. "Mama!" Opal appeared at the bottom of the stairs, Captain dangling from one hand. "There's a cat on Bertie's face." "That's Cleopatra. Bertie says she's her best friend now." "What does Bertie say about breakfast?" "Bertie says she can smell bacon, and if there's really bacon, she'll be good for a whole year." Ruth pulled herself up. "Tell your sister there's bacon." The scream that came from upstairs was pure joy. Ruth heard feet hit the floor, heard Clem's sharp, "Don't run on the stairs," heard Bertie's breathless, "Bacon, Clem, real bacon," and something in her chest that had been clenched tight for months loosened just enough to let her breathe. She cooked
Bacon, eggs, biscuits from flour that wasn't full of weevils, coffee for Clem, who drank it black like she was daring someone to tell her she was too young. The girls ate like they were afraid the food would vanish. Bertie fed scraps to Cleopatra under the table. Opal explained to Captain in great detail what eggs were and how chickens made them. "Chickens don't make eggs," Clem said. "They lay them." "Making and laying is the same thing." "It absolutely is not." "Captain says it is." "Captain is a rag doll with one eye." "Captain is a veteran." Opal lifted the doll with great dignity. "He's seen things." Ruth almost laughed. Almost. But the light on the road was still burning in her memory, and Josiah's words about leverage sat in her stomach like a stone. After breakfast, she put the girls to work. Clem swept every floor in the house. Bertie took over the chicken coop like she'd been appointed its commanding officer. Opal was assigned to egg collection and spent 20 minutes negotiating with each hen personally before removing their eggs. Ruth attacked the kitchen, scrubbed the stove until the iron gleamed, reorganized the pantry, found the garden behind the house, half wild, choked with weeds, but alive. Tomatoes still producing in the July heat, squash running along the fence, beans climbing a trellis that someone had built with care. She was on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds, when a shadow fell over her. "You found the garden," Josiah said. Ruth sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with a dirt-streaked hand. "Your wife planted this." "Yes." She knew what she was doing. These tomato plants are 5 years old and still bearing. That takes good rootstock and someone who understood soil. Sarah grew up on a farm in Virginia. She could make anything grow. His voice was careful, measured, like he was handling something breakable. "I've been keeping it alive. Don't know why. Can't grow anything myself. Just water and hope." "Water and hope is half of gardening." Ruth looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "The other half is stubbornness. I've got plenty of that." I noticed. He held out a hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet without strain, without the grunt or the grimace, or the micro-expression of effort that every other person made when dealing with her weight. Just pulled her up like she weighed nothing, and let go. "I found something else," Ruth said. "In the attic. Clem was checking the windows and found a trunk full of papers." Josiah's face closed like a door slamming. "Those are private." "I didn't read them. I can't read. But Clem can, and she says some of them look like legal documents. Land surveys, tax assessments." Ruth paused. "Letters from a lawyer in Cheyenne." "You went through my things." "Your attic is part of the house I'm supposed to keep. I wasn't searching, Mr. Hale. I was cleaning." She held his gaze. "But now that I know they're there, I need to ask, are the Kells trying to take this ranch through the courts?" Josiah stood very still. The sun beat down. Somewhere behind the house, Opal was singing a nonsense song to the chickens. 3 lawsuits in 2 years, he said finally. Water rights disputes, property line challenges, tax liens. The judge files them. His own court hears them. And somehow, I keep winning because the law's actually on my side. But it costs money every time. Lawyer fees, travel to Cheyenne, filing costs. He's bleeding me dry without ever touching me. How long can you hold out? Another year. Ruth pulled a weed from the tomato bed and crushed it between her fingers. So that's why you bought my contract. Not charity. Math. What? A woman and 3 children in the house. A functioning household. It's harder to claim a property's abandoned or mismanaged when there's a family living on it. Harder to send inspectors when there are children to witness what they do. You didn't buy me to cook your meals, Mr. Hale. You bought me to make this place look alive. Josiah stared at her. That's not... Don't. Ruth's voice went hard. Don't lie to me. I've had enough lies to last 3 lifetimes. Every man I've ever known has had a reason for what he did, and it was never the reason he said. So tell me the truth. Did you buy my contract because you needed a family on this property to protect your claim? The silence between them could have filled the valley. Josiah's jaw worked. His hands opened and closed at his sides. And Ruth watched him fight with himself, watched the war between the truth and whatever story he'd planned to tell. Partly, he said. Thank you. But not entirely. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, and Ruth saw how tired he looked without the shadow of the brim. I was in town for supplies. I heard about the auction. I went to watch. And when I saw the Kells bidding on you, on your girls, I couldn't stand there and let it happen. That's the truth, too. Both things are true. You needed a family to protect your ranch, and you didn't want the Kells to own mine. Yes. And which reason came first? He put his hat back on. Does it matter? It matters to me. The second one. He said it quiet, almost ashamed. I saw your daughter, the little one, holding that doll, and I saw Leland Kell looking at her. And I thought about Ezra, and what I would have done if someone had looked at my son that way. His voice dropped. That's what made me reach for my coins. The ranch came second, I swear it. Ruth studied him the way Clem studied contracts, line by line, looking for the lie. She didn't find one. Maybe it was there, buried too deep for her to see. But she didn't find one. All right, she said. Then we're partners. Not employer and help. Partners. You need this ranch to survive. I need this roof to survive. So we protect both. Partners, Josiah repeated, like the word was in a language he'd forgotten. Partners. Now help me stake these tomatoes before they fall over. They worked the garden together in silence. Josiah held the stakes, while Ruth tied the vines with strips of cloth torn from a feed sack. Their hands brushed once. He pulled back like he'd touched a hot stove. I don't bite, Mr. Hale. Didn't say you did. Then stop flinching every time we touch. It's going to be a long year if you jump like a spooked horse every time I hand you something. I'm not used to... He stopped. Started again. It's been 5 years since anyone was close enough to touch. The admission hung in the air. Ruth tied another vine and said nothing, because some things didn't need a response. They just needed space. That afternoon, Sheriff Hollis Crane rode up the southern road. Ruth saw the badge from the kitchen window, and her stomach clenched. Josiah came in from the barn, saw the rider, and told Ruth to stay inside. No, she said. Mrs. Dawson, I said no. Whatever he wants, he says it to both of us, or he says it to nobody. Josiah looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Sheriff Crane was older than Ruth expected. Mid-50s, gray beard, eyes that looked permanently tired. He dismounted with the stiffness of a man who spent too many hours in the saddle, and tipped his hat to Ruth with genuine courtesy. Ma'am, Sheriff Hollis Crane, Copper Bend. Mrs. Dawson? Mrs. Dawson. He glanced at Josiah. Hale. Sheriff? Mind if I water my horse? Trough's by the barn. While Crane led his mount over, Josiah and Ruth stood on the porch like soldiers waiting for orders. Clem appeared in the doorway behind them, silent as a shadow. Go upstairs, Ruth said. No. Clementine. I'm staying. Clem's voice was iron. I want to hear what he says. Crane came back, settled his weight against the porch railing, and pushed his hat back. I'll get straight to it.
Judge Kell filed a complaint this morning. Says you acquired Mrs. Dawson's labor contract through irregular means. Says the auction was compromised. He's requesting the territorial clerk void the contract and reassign it to his household. Ruth's vision tunneled. He can't do that. He's a judge, ma'am. He can file whatever he wants. Whether it sticks is another question. Crane looked at Josiah. The auction was conducted legally? You can check with Fergus. I bid, I paid, I signed. The contract includes protections for the children that I wrote in before the auction. Everything's on paper. Fergus will say whatever the Kells tell him to say, Clem said from the doorway. Crane looked at the girl. And you are? Clementine Dawson. I read the contract before my mother signed it. Every word. It's legal and it protects us. You can read? Better than most adults in this territory. And I remember every word of that contract. Clem stepped onto the porch. If Judge Kell wants to void it, he'll have to explain why a 14-year-old girl's testimony about its contents shouldn't be admissible in court. Last I checked, territory law doesn't have an age limit on witnesses. Crane stared at her. Then he looked at Ruth. Your daughter always like this? Since birth, Ruth said. She's not wrong. Crane rubbed his jaw. A witness who read the contract at the time of signing carries weight, even a young one. He turned back to Josiah. The complaint's filed, but not adjudicated yet. That means the contract stands until a hearing. I'd say you've got 2, maybe 3 weeks before Kell pushes it to court. Which court? Josiah asked. His? That's the problem, isn't it? Crane's voice was careful. Judge Kell presides over the district court. Any challenge to the contract goes through him. A judge ruling on his own complaint, Ruth said. That's not law. That's robbery. Ma'am, I don't disagree. But until someone files for a change of venue or gets the territorial governor involved, that's the system we've got. Then we get the governor involved, Clem said. That takes time, money, and connections. The Kells have all 3. Crane put his hat back on. I'm telling you this because I believe in fair warning. I'm not on the Kells' side, but I'm also not in a position to stop a judge from using his own court. My authority ends where his begins. Then what good are you? Ruth asked. Not angry, honestly asking. Crane had the grace to wince. I can make sure the process is followed. I can make sure any hearing is public. And I can make sure that if something happens to you or your family outside of court proceedings, there's an official record. He looked at Josiah. I heard about the riders last night. News travels fast. 2 of my deputies spotted them heading back toward town. Kell's men, both of them. Crane's voice dropped. I can't arrest them for riding a public road at night. But I can tell you that Leland Kell was seen at the saloon afterwards, buying drinks and talking about how his father's new housekeeper wouldn't last a month in the hills. He's planning something, Josiah said. He's always planning something. That boy's got a taste for other people's misery that his father's money can't buy and his father's position can't excuse. Crane moved toward his horse. Watch your back, Hale. Watch your family's back harder. And if anything happens, anything at all, you send word to my office before you pick up that rifle. I mean it. And if your office can't help? Crane mounted up and looked down at them. The scarred rancher, the fat widow, the 14-year-old girl who read law better than most men in the territory. Then God help all of us, because this valley's overdue for a reckoning, and I'd rather it came through a courtroom than a graveyard. He rode off. Ruth stood on the porch and watched the dust settle and felt the walls closing in. 2 weeks, she said. 3, maybe, Josiah said. Before a judge who wants to take my children rules on whether he's allowed to take my children? Ruth's voice was shaking. She couldn't stop it.
What kind of country lets that happen?
The kind we live in. Josiah's hand hovered near her shoulder, then dropped. Still couldn't bring himself to touch her without permission. We'll fight it.
How? We've got no lawyer, no money, no...
We've got Clem. Josiah looked at the girl still standing in the doorway. And we've got the truth.
And we've got 3 weeks to figure out how to make both of them matter.
Clem met his eyes. Something passed between them. Not warmth, not trust. Recognition. The acknowledgement of two people who'd been underestimated their entire lives and had learned to make that work for them. "I need those papers from the attic," Clem said. "All of them. Every letter, every filing, every tax record. They're private. They're evidence. If Kell's been filing false complaints and rigging his own court, there'll be a pattern. Dates, amounts, rulings that don't match the law." Clem's chin lifted. "I can find it. I just need you to let me look." Josiah stood very still. Ruth could see the war in him, the need for privacy fighting the need for survival. The walls he'd built around his dead wife's memory cracking under the weight of a living family's desperation. "I'll bring them down after supper," he said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just find something we can use." He walked off toward the barn, and Ruth watched him go. This impossible man who kept giving pieces of himself away like he didn't realize he was running out. "Mama?" Clem's voice was softer now, the iron gone. "I can do this. I know I can. I know you can too, baby. I'm not a baby. You're 14. You're my baby. And you're going to save this family if I let you." Ruth pulled her daughter close and held her tight, and Clem let her, just for a moment, before pulling away and straightening her spine. "I need paper," Clem said, "and ink, and a table where I can spread everything out. You'll have it." That night, after Opal and Bertie were asleep, Bertie with Cleopatra purring on her chest, Opal with Captain standing guard on the pillow, Clem sat at the kitchen table while Josiah brought down the trunk from the attic. He set it on the floor and opened it. Ruth saw his hands hesitate over the papers inside, fingers brushing the edges the way you'd touch something holy. "Sarah's handwriting is on some of these," he said quietly. "The household accounts. She kept records of everything." "I'll be careful," Clem said. Josiah nodded. Then he pulled out the first stack and laid it on the table, and Ruth watched her 14-year-old daughter begin reading with the focus of a woman 3 times her age. Ruth brought coffee. Josiah sat across the table, pretending to clean his rifle, but really watching Clem work. 2 hours passed. 3. "Here," Clem said suddenly. Both adults looked up. "Tax assessment from 1876, signed by Judge Kell." She held up a yellowed paper. "He valued this property at $800. Standard rate for a ranch this size with water rights." "That sounds right," Josiah said. "Now look at this." She held up another paper. "Tax assessment from 1877. Same property, same judge. Valued at $2,200. Nearly 3 times higher." She laid them side by side. "The land didn't change. The water didn't change. Nothing changed, except the judge wanted more money from you. And when you couldn't pay the higher taxes, he filed a lien." Josiah leaned forward. "I paid the lien. Cost me half my cattle money." "I know. The receipt's here." Clem pulled another paper. "But look at the date. The lien was filed 3 days before the tax assessment was officially recorded. He filed the penalty before he filed the tax. That's not legal procedure. That's a man writing the ending before the story." Ruth looked at Josiah. "Can we use that?" "If we get it to someone who isn't Judge Kell, yes." Josiah's eyes were sharp now, focused. "The territorial governor, the federal marshal,
Someone with authority over a district judge. "The nearest federal marshal is in Helena," Clem said. 3 days' ride. Then someone rides to Helena. "And leaves us alone for 6 days?" Ruth shook her head. "The Kells would be here before you cleared the valley." "Then we send a letter." "Letters can be intercepted.
The post goes through Copper Bend." Clem was thinking, her eyes moving the way they did when she was reading. Fast, tracking, connecting. "We need someone to carry it, someone the Kells won't suspect, someone who isn't connected to this ranch." Silence around the table. The lamp flickered. Outside, wind moved through the pines. "Mabel Thorne," Josiah said. "Who?" Ruth asked. "Runs the general store in Copper Bend. She's been here longer than the Kells. Her husband was the original claim holder for half this valley before the judge arrived." Josiah's voice was careful. "She's got no love for the Kells, and she's got a nephew who rides freight to Helena twice a month." "Can you trust her?" "I trust her more than anyone else in that town, which isn't saying much, but it's what we've got." Ruth looked at her daughter, at the papers spread across the table, at the pattern Clem was finding in a dead woman's careful handwriting and a corrupt judge's sloppy fraud.
"Then we go to town," Ruth said. "Tomorrow. That's dangerous. Everything's dangerous. But hiding here and waiting for Kell to take my children is worse." She stood up, and her chair scraped the floor. "Tomorrow, you, me, and Clem, we go to Mabel Thorne. We give her the papers, and we start fighting back with something better than rifles." Josiah looked at her across the lamplight. The scar on his face caught the shadows. His pale eyes held something she was learning to recognize. Not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of belief. The first crack in the wall of a man who'd stopped believing anything could be saved. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow." Ruth collected the papers carefully, stacking them in the order Clem had arranged them. Evidence. Proof. A 14-year-old girl's weapon against a territory judge's empire. She climbed the stairs and checked on the younger girls. Birdie had rolled onto her side, one arm flung over Cleopatra, the other clutching her corn-husk doll. Opal slept with Captain on her chest and her thumb near her mouth, a habit she'd almost broken before the hunger started. Ruth stood in the doorway and watched them breathe. Her daughters. Her reason for standing on auction blocks and signing contracts she couldn't read and trusting men she didn't know. She crossed to her room and sat on the narrow bed. Through the floor she could hear Josiah putting the trunk away, then his boots on the stairs, not coming up, just passing through. The front door opened and closed. The porch creaked under his weight. Standing guard again. Sitting in the dark, watching the southern road, keeping the monsters at bay with nothing but a rifle and the kind of stubbornness that Ruth was beginning to understand wasn't just habit. It was grief, hardened into purpose. A man who couldn't protect his wife and son, protecting someone else's family, because the alternative was admitting that all those years of standing guard had been for nothing. Ruth lay down, closed her eyes, opened them, got up, went downstairs, poured 2 cups of coffee, carried them to the porch. Josiah looked up when the door opened. His rifle lay across his knees. The mountains were black cutouts against a sky full of stars. Ruth handed him a cup and sat in the rocking chair beside him. Sarah's chair, the one with the cushion. She didn't ask permission. "You don't have to sit out here," he said. "Neither do you. Someone needs to watch. Then someone will have company." She sipped her coffee. "Tell me about Ezra." Josiah's hand tightened on his cup. "Why?" "Because you're sitting in the dark thinking about him anyway. And talking is better than thinking. I know that from experience." The stars turned overhead.
A coyote called from the ridge. The coffee cooled. He laughed at everything, Josiah said finally. His voice was rough, like the words had been stored in a place that didn't get much air. 3 years old, and the whole world was funny to him. The horses, the chickens, his own feet. A breath. He had Sarah's hair. Red. Bright red. Like somebody set his head on fire. What did he call you? Pa. The single syllable sounded like it cost him something vital. Just Pa. Couldn't say the whole thing yet. Ruth rocked the chair, back and forth, back and forth. Opal calls her doll Captain. I know. She'll start calling you something eventually. Might not be Pa. Might be worse. She called the mailman in Missouri Mr. Big Nose for 2 years. That sound again. Low. Barely there, but real. Josiah Hale, laughing in the dark on a porch where his dead wife used to sit. I'm not ready for that, he said. Nobody's ready for Opal. They sat in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable silence, the other kind. The kind that meant two people had stopped performing and were just existing in the same space. Tired and scared and alive. Ruth, she said. What? My name. It's Ruth. If we're partners, you should use it. He was quiet for a long time. Josiah, he said. Nobody calls me that, but you can. Josiah, she tested it. It's a good name. Biblical. My mother had hopes. Did you live up to them? Not even close. Ruth finished her coffee and stood. Get some sleep. I'll take the next watch. You don't know how to... I know how to sit in a chair and look at a road. If something moves, I'll scream loud enough to wake the whole valley. She took the rifle from his lap before he could protest. Go. Sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Josiah looked at her, this woman in a dead woman's nightshirt, holding a rifle she'd probably never fired, standing guard over a ranch she didn't own for a man she barely knew. And something in his face shifted. Not a crack this time. A door, opening just wide enough to let the light in. Good night, Ruth. Good night, Josiah. He went inside. Ruth settled into the rocking chair, laid the rifle across her knees the way she'd seen him do it, and watched the southern road. Nothing moved. Nothing burned. The stars wheeled overhead and the mountains held their silence. And somewhere in the darkness, Ruth Ella Dawson stopped being afraid. Not because the danger was gone. It wasn't. The Kells were out there, patient and powerful, and planning something she couldn't see. But fear was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She had 3 daughters sleeping upstairs, a partner who was learning to trust her, and a 14-year-old weapon of mass destruction who'd found the first crack in a corrupt judge's armor. Tomorrow, they'd ride to town. Tomorrow, the fight would start for real. But tonight, Ruth sat in the dead woman's chair and held a borrowed rifle and watched over a home that was slowly, impossibly, becoming hers. And that was enough. For now, that was enough. They rode into Copper Bend before noon. Josiah drove. Ruth sat beside him on the bench this time, not in the back. Clem rode behind them with the papers wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside her shirt like a secret worth killing for. Bertie and Opal stayed at the ranch with the doors locked, and Cleopatra standing guard, which Bertie insisted was sufficient protection against any force on earth. Mabel Thorne's general store sat at the far end of Main Street, past the saloon and the livery and the auction platform that Ruth refused to look at. The building was small, crammed with goods from floor to ceiling, and smelled like tobacco and dried apples and the particular stubbornness of a woman who'd outlasted every man who'd tried to run her off. Mabel herself was 60 years old, built like a fence post, with gray hair pinned back so tight it pulled her eyebrows up. She looked at Josiah, then at Ruth, then at Clem, and said, "You'd better come in the back." The back room was a storeroom, with a table cleared of everything except a lamp and Mabel's coffee pot. She poured 4 cups without asking and sat down. "I heard about the auction," she said. "I heard about the complaint. And I heard Leland Kell telling half the saloon that you'd be gone by August." She looked at Ruth. "You're the widow." "I'm the widow." "You're bigger than I expected." "Most people say that." "I'm not most people. I'm saying it because you'll need to be big to survive what's coming." Mabel turned to Josiah. "What do you need?" Josiah nodded at Clem. "Show her." Clem unwrapped the oilcloth and laid the papers on the table. One by one, she walked Mabel through what she'd found: the inflated tax assessments, the backdated liens, the pattern of fraud stretching back 3 years. Mabel listened without interrupting, her coffee going cold in her hands.
"Well," Mabel said when Clem finished, "the girl's got a brain. Question is whether a brain's enough to beat a judge in his own territory."
"It is if we get these papers to someone with authority over him," Clem said.
"Federal marshal in Helena."
"Your nephew runs freight there."
"He does." Mabel looked at Josiah. "You know what happens if I do this? Kell finds out I helped you. He'll come for my store, my livelihood, everything I've got."
"I know."
"So why should I?"
"Because he came for your husband's land first." Josiah's voice was quiet. 20 years ago. And you've been waiting for a chance to make that right ever since. Mabel's jaw tightened. She stared at the papers for a long time. Then she folded them back into the oilcloth with careful hands. "My nephew leaves Thursday. I'll have these on his wagon by Wednesday night. But Josiah, this buys you time. It doesn't buy you safety. The marshal investigates. That takes weeks, maybe months, and the Kells won't sit still while it happens." "I know. There's something else." Mabel looked at Ruth now. "The contract. It's legal, but it's fragile. A labor agreement between a single man and a widow with children. Kell will argue impropriety. He'll say the children are in an unsuitable environment. He'll use it to petition for their removal." Ruth's blood went cold. "He can't take my children." "He's a judge, honey. He can try, and trying is enough to make your life hell." Mabel leaned forward. "You want to make that contract unbreakable? Make it something else. A marriage certificate carries more legal weight than any labor agreement ever written. A judge can void a work contract. Voiding a marriage takes an act of God and a territorial governor." The word hung in the air. Marriage. Ruth felt it land in her chest like a dropped stone. "No," Josiah said. "Think about it," Mabel said. "I said no. And I said, think about it." Mabel stood. "I'll get the papers to Helena. You two figure out the rest. But figure it fast, because Leland Kell was in here yesterday buying rope and lamp oil, and that boy doesn't build things. He burns them." They left the store in silence. Josiah loaded supplies into the wagon with sharp, controlled movements that Ruth recognized. The way a man moved when he was angry and didn't trust himself to speak. She waited until they cleared the town limits. Then she said it. "She's right. Don't. A marriage certificate protects the girls more than any contract." "I said don't." His hands tightened on the reins. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to sign a piece of paper. Same rooms, same arrangement. Nothing changes except the law can't touch us." "Everything changes." Josiah's voice was raw. "I had a wife, Ruth. A real wife. She's buried on that hill behind the house, and you're asking me to stand in a church and say those words again, like they don't mean anything. I'm asking you to say them because they mean everything." Ruth turned to face him. "You think I want this? You think I dreamed of marrying a man I've known for 2 weeks because a judge wants to steal my children? This isn't about want. This is about survival. It's about lying. It's about living." Her voice cracked. "My daughters, Josiah. If Kel takes them, I will never see them again. You know that. You know what happens to children in that man's household. So don't tell me about your dead wife's memory. Tell me whether you're willing to let 3 living children be destroyed because you can't sign your name on a piece of paper." Clem sat in the wagon bed behind them, silent. Ruth could feel her daughter listening, could feel the weight of a 14-year-old's judgment pressing down. Josiah drove for a mile without speaking. The horses plodded. The sun beat down. Dust rose and settled. "Sunday," he said. "What?" "We do it Sunday. In the church. Public. Witnesses. So nobody can claim coercion." His voice was flat, mechanical. "We tell the preacher today. We tell the town. We make it real enough that Kel can't challenge it." "Josiah." "And after." He stopped the horses, turned to look at her. "After, nothing changes. You understand? Same rooms, same life. This is protection. That's all." "That's all," Ruth said, and she told herself she meant it. They told the preacher that afternoon. Word spread through Copper Bend like wildfire through dry brush, which was exactly what they wanted. By Saturday evening, half the territory knew that Josiah Hale was marrying the widow Dawson, and the other half had opinions about it. Sunday morning came bright and hot. Ruth put on the blue dress she'd been sewing from fabric she'd found in Sarah's trunk. She hadn't asked permission. She hadn't needed to. The fabric had been cut for a dress that was never finished, and Ruth had finished it, altering the pattern to fit her body, and when she came downstairs, Josiah looked at her and went completely still. "That's Sarah's fabric," he said. "Yes." "You look—" He stopped, swallowed. "You look nice." "I look like a fat woman in a dead woman's dress going to a wedding she doesn't want. But thank you." Something almost broke in his face. Almost smiled. "Let's go." They loaded into the wagon. Opal wore a ribbon Mabel had sent over. Bertie carried Cleopatra, who yowled the entire ride. Clem wore her regular clothes and her regular expression, alert, suspicious, ready. The church was full, not with well-wishers, with spectators. Ruth saw the curiosity, the judgment, the barely hidden smirks. A fat woman marrying the scarred hermit from the mountains. What a show. They were 20 feet from the church door when the horses came. 6 riders. Leland Kell in front on a black stallion. His nose healed, but his eyes worse. Colder. Emptier. Patient with the wrong kind of patience. Behind him, 5 men with guns on their hips and the look of men being paid not to think. "Well," Leland called out, reining in at the edge of the churchyard. "The killer and his bride. Didn't think you'd actually go through with it, Hale." Josiah stepped in front of Ruth and the girls. His hand went to his hip. Empty. He'd left the gun in the wagon. "Ride on, Leland." "Public church. Public street." Leland dismounted. His men followed. "We're here to witness. Unless the bride has something she'd like to say first." He looked at Ruth. That empty, patient look. "Mrs. Dawson, before you do something you can't take back, is this marriage voluntary? Or is the man who bought you for $2 forcing you into this
because he knows it's the only way to keep you from the authorities. The trap. Ruth saw it clearly.
Say yes, it's voluntary, and Leland would claim she'd been coerced into saying yes. Say nothing, and he'd claim silence was proof of fear. Every answer was wrong. Every response played into his hands. So Ruth didn't answer Leland. She turned to the crowd.
You all watched me get sold on that platform 3 weeks ago.
Her voice carried across the churchyard, strong and clear.
You watched and you laughed, and not one of you said a word. So I'm going to say some words now, and you're going to listen.
Nobody moved.
I'm Ruth Ella Dawson. I weigh 310 pounds. I can't read. I was married to a drunk who hit me and died in a creek and left me nothing but debt and 3 daughters who hadn't eaten in 3 days when I climbed onto that auction block.
She took a breath.
And Josiah Hale paid $2 for my contract and gave my girls food and shelter and locked doors and didn't lay a hand on any of us except to help us down from a wagon.
She looked at Leland.
Your father bid on me too. Bid on my children. Wanted to buy us like furniture for his house. And every person in this town knows what the Kell household does with the people it owns. So don't you stand there and talk to me about coercion. Don't you dare.
Leland's face darkened. He took a step forward, and his hand came up. Josiah moved. Fast, silent, suddenly between them. He didn't touch Leland. Didn't need to. Just stood there, 6'3" of scarred, coiled fury. Close enough that Leland had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. Touch her, Josiah said quietly, and they'll bury you in that churchyard today. In front of all these witnesses, every single one of them. The 2 men stood inches apart. Ruth could see Leland calculating. The distance to his men, the speed of his draw, the odds. And she could see the moment he decided the odds weren't good enough. This isn't over, Leland said. Yes, it is. Sheriff Crane stepped out of the crowd with his hand on his gun. Leland, your father told you to observe, not to interfere. So observe from your saddle, or observe from my jail cell. Choose. Leland looked at Crane, at Josiah, at Ruth. Then he smiled that empty smile and stepped back. Congratulations to the happy couple, he said. I give it a month. He mounted up and rode off with his men. The dust settled. The crowd exhaled. Shall we? The preacher said from the doorway. And there was nothing to do but walk inside and get married. The ceremony took 10 minutes. Ruth's hand shook in Josiah's. His was steady as stone. The preacher spoke about duty and partnership and the shelter of honest commitment. He didn't say love. Smart man. When it was done, Josiah squeezed her hand once. Didn't kiss her. Just signed the certificate and stepped back and looked at her with eyes that held too many things to name. They drove home in silence. The girls fell asleep in the wagon bed. Ruth sat beside Josiah and watched the road unwind and tried to feel something other than numb. That speech, Josiah said as they crested the last ridge. In the churchyard. What about it? It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. It was desperate. Same thing sometimes. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Ruth? Yes? Thank you for doing this. I know it cost you. It cost both of us. Yes. He looked at the house, at the mountains, at the sky going red behind them. It did. 2 weeks of fragile peace, 14 days of falling into rhythm, Ruth cooking and keeping house, Josiah working cattle, the girls filling the silence with life. Clem read everything she could find, building her case paper by paper. Bertie adopted 2 more barn cats. Opal taught Captain to ride a chicken, which ended badly for the chicken. And Ruth and Josiah learned to exist in the same space without flinching. He stopped pulling away when their hands touched over dishes. She stopped holding her breath when he came through the door. They sat on the porch every night after the girls went to bed, drinking coffee and talking about things that didn't matter, and sometimes things that did. "How did Sarah die?" Ruth asked one night. "You said typhus, but how?" "Fast." His voice was distant. 3 days from the first fever to the end. Ezra went first. He was so small, Ruth, barely 30 pounds. The fever ate through him like fire through paper. And Sarah, she wouldn't leave his side, wouldn't let me take her to a doctor. Said if her boy was going to die, he'd die in his mother's arms. He stopped. She followed him 2 days later, holding his hand. Ruth reached over and took his hand. He let her. "I wasn't there," he said. "I was working security for a cattle drive 3 towns over, making money to finish the house. And by the time the letter reached me and I rode back, they were already in the ground. Neighbors buried them. Strangers, basically. My wife and my son, buried by strangers. That wasn't your fault. Everything's my fault. I left them alone. I took the job because I needed money, and they died alone because of it. They died because of a disease, Josiah, not because of you. Doesn't feel that way." He squeezed her hand. "Doesn't feel that way at all." The fire came on day 15. Ruth woke to Josiah's hand on her shoulder, hard and urgent. "Get the girls. Root cellar. Now." She smelled it before she saw it. Smoke, thick and choking, pouring through the window. She ran across the hall, grabbed Bertie and Opal, shook Clem awake. "Fire," she said. "Move." They made it downstairs and out the back door. The barn was an inferno. Flames 40 feet high, roaring like a living thing, turning the night orange and hellish. The heat hit them from 100 yards. Josiah was already running toward the corral, throwing open gates, freeing panicked cattle. His horse screamed inside the barn. "Josiah, don't!" Ruth screamed. He went in anyway, disappeared into the smoke and fire. Ruth shoved the girls toward the root cellar. "Get inside! Lock the door! Don't open it for anyone!" "Mama," Clem started. "Go!" Ruth ran toward the barn. She couldn't see through the smoke. Heat pressed against her skin like a wall. Then Josiah appeared, dragging his horse by the halter, both of them coughing, the horse's mane singed. He turned back. Ruth grabbed him. "It's done. The roof's going." 3 more horses. "They're gone, Josiah. You go back in there, you die." A beam cracked. The roof buckled. Josiah looked at the barn with a face that was watching something die. Not just wood and animals, but the last thing he'd built with his own hands for a future that kept getting destroyed. Ruth pulled him backward. The roof collapsed. Sparks shot 50 feet into the sky. And they stood in the yard, covered in soot, watching 5 years of work burn to nothing. Bertie's voice, thin and broken, came from the root cellar door. "The kittens, Mama. Cleopatra's kittens were in the barn." Ruth's heart cracked. Bertie had been so proud of those kittens. 4 tiny things born a week ago. She'd named them all. She'd told them stories every morning. Josiah crouched in front of Bertie. Soot on his face, burns on his hands, and his eyes. His eyes were the worst thing Ruth had ever seen. A man watching a child's grief and knowing he'd caused it by not being enough. "I'm sorry," he said. "Bertie, I'm so sorry." Bertie threw her arms around his neck and wept. And Josiah held her, this man who couldn't save his own son, holding someone else's daughter, while everything he'd built turned to ash behind them.
Cleopatra appeared at dawn, singed, limping, yowling with fury. And in her mouth, one kitten. Orange, tiny, alive. Birdie couldn't speak. She just took the kitten and held it against her chest, and rocked it, and rocked it. And the tears that came were the kind that break you open and put you back together at the same time. "What do we call her?" Opal whispered. Josiah looked at the tiny thing. "Phoenix," he said, "because she survived the fire." That night, sitting in the ruins, Josiah told Ruth the rest of it. The parts he'd kept locked away. The bounty hunting. The 5 men he'd killed. The reputation that followed him like a shadow. "I'm a killer, Ruth. I've put men in the ground and walked away. The Kells know it. The sheriff knows it. Everyone in this territory knows what I am." "What you were?" "What I am. You don't stop being a killer because you want to. It lives in your hands, in the way you see the world, always measuring distances, always calculating threats." He held up his scarred knuckles. "These hands built that barn. They built this house. They held my son when he was born. But they killed 5 men first, and everyone who looks at me sees the killing, not the building." Ruth took his hands, turned them over, pressed her lips to his scarred knuckles, felt him stop breathing. "I see a man who ran into a burning barn to save horses," she said against his skin. "I see a man who held my daughter while she cried over kittens. I see a man who paid $2 for a woman nobody wanted and gave her the first safe night she'd had in years." "Ruth, I'm not done." She looked up at him. "I see a man who's so afraid of being a killer that he forgot he's also a builder. You built this ranch. You built that barn. You'll build it again. And the Kells can burn it down 100 times, and you'll build it 101, because that's who you are. Not the killing, the building." Josiah stared at her. The firelight from the dying embers painted shadows across his face. His eyes were wet. "I don't deserve—" "Shut up." Ruth kissed him, hard and honest and desperate. Not romantic, real. The kind of kiss that said, "I'm here. I'm not leaving. I'm choosing you in the middle of the wreckage, because that's when choices actually count." He kissed her back. 6 years of loneliness and 5 years of grief, and 2 weeks of watching this woman take his broken world and make it breathe again. All of it, pouring out in a kiss that tasted like smoke and salt and the terrifying possibility of beginning again. They broke apart, foreheads together, breathing hard. "We're going to survive this," Ruth whispered. "Promise me something." His voice shook. "If it comes to it, if the Kells come with force, you take the girls and run. Don't wait for me. Don't look back." "Josiah." "Promise me, Ruth." She wanted to argue, but she had 3 daughters, and a promise was the only thing she could give him that cost nothing and meant everything. "I promise," she said, and prayed she'd never have to keep it. They sat in the ashes until dawn, 2 people who'd been broken separately, holding each other in the wreckage, choosing to believe that what they were building together was stronger than what kept getting destroyed. The sun came up, the smoke cleared, and somewhere between the burned barn and the standing house, between the grief and the hope, between the $2 that started everything and the kiss that changed it, Ruth Ella Dawson stopped being a woman who survived and started being a woman who fought. She just didn't know yet how much the fighting would cost. The first wagon appeared the morning after the fire. Ruth was on her knees in the ash, salvaging what she could. A few tools, some scorched nails, a harness that had somehow survived. When the sound of hooves and wheels brought her head up, A man she didn't recognize drove a flatbed loaded with fresh-cut lumber. Behind him, 2 more wagons. Behind those, riders on horseback. 6, 8, 10 people coming up the road like a procession. "Josiah!" Ruth stood, her hands black with soot. "Josiah, come here!" He came out of the house with his rifle, saw the wagons, and went still. The lead driver pulled up and climbed down. Weathered face, calloused hands, the build of a man who'd been ranching since before his beard came in. He looked at the burned barn, then at Josiah, then at Ruth. "Name's Harlan Briggs. Ranch about 12 miles east." He spat tobacco into the dirt. "Heard about your barn. Heard who did it. Brought lumber." "I didn't ask for help," Josiah said. "Nobody asked you to ask." Harlan waved the other wagons forward. "Some of us been watching the Kells squeeze this valley for 20 years. Figured it was time to squeeze back." A woman climbed down from the second wagon. Tall, sun-browned, arms like she'd spent her life hauling water and baling hay. "I'm Clara Briggs, Harlan's wife. I brought food for the workers and clothes for the girls. Don't argue, it's already cooked." Ruth opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when that barn's standing." Clara was already unloading baskets. "Where are those daughters of yours? I've got 3 boys at home and enough hand-me-downs to dress an army." By noon, there were 15 people on the property. Ranchers, homesteaders, a blacksmith named Domingo Vasquez, who'd brought his own anvil and set up near the ruins with quiet efficiency. They worked without ceremony, without speeches, just men and women who'd decided that enough was enough, and showed up with their hands and their lumber, and their stubborn refusal to let the Kells win. Josiah worked alongside them, and Ruth watched something happen to him that she hadn't expected. He straightened. Not physically. The man already stood like a post. But something inside him, some internal architecture that had been sagging under the weight of solitude, started bearing load again. He directed the construction with a quiet authority that surprised her. Not barking orders, consulting, listening, adjusting when someone with more carpentry experience suggested a better approach. And the men responded, not because they feared him, but because they respected a man who could take help without making it feel like charity. Ruth fed them all, stretched every scrap of food in the pantry, added what Clara had brought, and turned it into meals that kept 15 bodies working from dawn to dusk. Bertie helped, carrying water to the workers with Opal, who had appointed herself and Captain as official quality inspectors of every board and nail. "This one's crooked," Opal told Domingo, pointing at a perfectly straight post. "You think so, little boss?" "Captain thinks so." Domingo crouched down and examined the post with elaborate seriousness. "Captain has a good eye. But this post, she's straight. The ground is crooked. That's the trick, see? You build straight on crooked ground, and everything looks a little wrong, even when it's right." Opal considered this. "That's how people are, too." Domingo looked at her, then at Ruth. "Your daughter is a philosopher." "My daughter is 5. She'll be a philosopher when she can tie her own shoes." On the 3rd day, Clem found Ruth in the kitchen at dawn. Her gray eyes had dark circles under them. She'd been reading by lamplight every night, going through the papers from Sarah's trunk, and she looked like she'd aged 5 years in a week. "I found something," Clem said. "Sit down, eat first." "Mama, I found something. Big." Ruth set down the skillet. "How big?" "Judge Kell didn't just inflate Josiah's taxes. He did it to 11 other ranches in the valley. Same pattern. Assessment goes up by 300%. Owner can't pay. Kell files a lien. Owner sells cheap or loses the land."
Clem spread papers on the table.
He's been doing it for at least 10 years. And he's been buying the foreclosed properties through a company called Bitterroot Land Trust.
So Bitterroot Land Trust is owned by Ambrose Kell. He's the judge who raises the taxes, the creditor who files the liens, and the buyer who gets the land when the owners default. He's all three. And I can prove it, because Sarah kept everything. Clem's voice cracked with exhaustion and triumph. She kept receipts, Mama. She kept letters between Josiah's lawyer and the trust company. She kept a copy of the trust's incorporation papers that lists Kell as the sole proprietor. I don't think she even knew what she had. She was just organized. How do you know about incorporation papers? You're 14. I read a law book in Mabel's store while you were buying flour. Clem said it like it was nothing. The point is, this isn't just about our ranch anymore. This is about every ranch Kell has stolen, every family he's destroyed. If the federal marshal sees this, it's not just fraud, it's racketeering, abuse of judicial authority. Kell doesn't just lose his seat, he goes to prison. Ruth stared at her daughter, this girl who'd been starving in a chicken coop 3 weeks ago, who taught herself to read from discarded newspapers, who was sitting at a dead woman's kitchen table, building a legal case that could bring down a territory judge.
Have you shown Josiah? Not yet. I wanted to show you first.
Why?
Because this changes things, Mama. If we send this to Helena, we're not just poking a bear. We're shooting at it. And the bear's going to come running before the bullet hits.
Clem met her eyes.
I need you to decide. Not Josiah. You. Because it's our lives on the line.
Ruth sat down across from her daughter. 14 years old. Eyes like flint. Hands still small enough to hold a corn-husk doll, but steady enough to hold the fate of a valley. Send it, Ruth said.
You're sure?
I'm sure. We didn't come this far to stop at the edge. Send everything. Clem nodded. No celebration, no relief. Just the grim satisfaction of a girl who'd found a weapon and was ready to use it. They told Josiah that morning. He read the papers, slowly, carefully, his face going harder with each page. When he finished, he laid them on the table and pressed both hands flat against the wood, like he was trying to hold something down. Sarah found all of this? She organized it, Clem said. I don't think she understood what it meant. She was keeping household records. But she filed everything by date and category, and when you put the pieces together, my wife's filing system is going to put a judge in prison. Josiah's voice was strange, rough. She'd have liked that. She always said the pen was mightier than the gun. I never believed her. Smart woman, Ruth said. The smartest. He looked at her, and something passed between them that Clem had the good sense to pretend she didn't see. When do we send it? Mabel's nephew leaves Thursday, but this is bigger than what we sent before. I want to write a cover letter explaining the pattern. Clem hesitated. I need help. I can read, and I can find patterns, but I don't write well enough for a federal officer. I'll help, Josiah said. You write well? I write clearly. Sarah taught me. Another ghost. Another gift from a woman 5 years dead, still saving the family that came after her. They worked on it together that night, Josiah and Clem, at the kitchen table. Ruth listened from the doorway and watched something she'd never expected. Her daughter and her husband bent over the same page, arguing about word choice, debating the order of evidence, building something together that was neither violence nor surrender, but the sharp, dangerous edge between the two. No, Clem said, crossing out a line. Don't say, we believe. Say, the evidence demonstrates. Belief is opinion. Evidence is fact. You sound like a lawyer.
I sound like someone who wants to win." Josiah looked at her.
Really looked. The way he'd looked at Ruth on the auction platform. Measuring, assessing, finding something worth more than he'd expected. "You're going to be terrifying when you grow up."
"I'm terrifying now."
Fair point. The letter was finished by midnight. 12 pages. Every accusation supported by documentation. Every pattern mapped. Every dollar traced from inflated tax bill to foreclosed ranch, to Bitterroot Land Trust, to Ambrose Kell's pocket. Josiah rode to Mabel's store the next morning and came back with news that made Ruth's stomach drop. "Mabel's nephew left early. Won't be back for 2 weeks."
2 weeks? We don't have 2 weeks."
"I know." Josiah stood in the kitchen, hat in hand, and Ruth could see the calculation in his eyes. "I'll ride to Helena myself." "No." Ruth's voice was immediate. 6 days round trip. The Kells will know you're gone within hours." "Then what do you suggest?" Clem spoke from the stairs.
"I'll go."
Both adults turned. "I'll go with Mabel. She can say I'm her niece visiting family in Helena. Nobody looks twice at an old woman and a girl on a freight road. But a man on a fast horse, alone, riding away from a ranch the Kells are watching? They'll follow you. They'll stop you. They'll take the papers." "You're 14, Josiah said. "I'm 14 and I've read every word of those documents, and I can explain them to a federal marshal better than either of you. No offense."
"Absolutely not," Ruth said.
"Mama!" "I said no. I'm not sending my daughter across the territory alone." "She wouldn't be alone," Josiah said quietly. Ruth turned on him. "Don't you dare agree with her." "She's right, Ruth. They're watching me. They're watching you. But a girl with an old woman on a freight road? That's invisible." He looked at Clem. "Can Mabel go?" "I'll ask her today."
"No."
Ruth stepped between them.
"No, no, no. She's a child. My child. And I'm not... Mama."
Clem came down the stairs and took Ruth's hands. Those young hands, thin and strong, ink-stained from days of reading and writing. "You put me on an auction block because you trusted me to survive it. You married a stranger because you trusted me to read a contract. Now trust me to carry it the rest of the way." Ruth's eyes burned. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair. But I can do this. I'm the only one who can." The argument lasted 2 hours. Ruth cried, Josiah paced. Clem stood her ground with the immovable patience of someone who'd already made up her mind and was waiting for the world to catch up. In the end, Ruth agreed. Not because she wanted to, because Clem was right, and the truth of it sat in her chest like a blade. Mabel agreed immediately. "Been wanting to visit my sister in Helena anyway," she said when Josiah brought Clem to the store. "Girl can ride with me. We'll leave tomorrow at first light. 4 days there, 1 day with the marshal, 4 days back. He'll have her home in 10 days. If anything happens to her," Ruth started. "Nothing will happen to her. She's with me, and I've been driving freight roads since before you were born." Mabel looked at Clem. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready since I learned to read." Ruth held her daughter for a long time that night. Held her the way she'd held her as a baby, as a toddler, as a girl growing up too fast in a world too hard. Clem let her. For once, she didn't pull away. She just leaned into her mother's arms and breathed. "Come back to me," Ruth whispered. "I will. Promise." "I promise, Mama." They left before dawn. Ruth stood on the porch and watched the wagon disappear down the southern road. Her firstborn daughter carrying enough evidence to destroy a judge, riding into a territory that didn't care about little girls or justice or the difference between the two. Josiah stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, solid and present, while Ruth fought the urge to run after the wagon and drag her daughter back. "She'll be all right," he said finally.
You don't know that.
"No, but I believe it. And right now, belief is all we've got." The days without Clem were the longest of Ruth's life. She cooked, she cleaned, she worked the garden. She fed the workers who kept coming, kept building, the bond rising board by board from the ashes. She held Bertie and Opal at night and told them stories about brave girls who went on adventures and always came home. She didn't tell them where Clem really was, said she was visiting Mabel's sister. Bertie didn't ask questions. Opal told Captain the whole story anyway, with dramatic embellishments involving pirates. Josiah watched the roads, day and night, his eyes scanning the horizons, his rifle never more than arm's reach away. He slept in 2-hour stretches, and Ruth learned to wake when he woke, to bring him coffee in the dark, to sit with him in silence, because being alone with fear was worse than being afraid together. On the 4th night, they sat on the porch, and Ruth said, "Tell me something good." "What?" "Anything. A memory? A moment? Something that doesn't involve fire or judges or guns." Josiah was quiet for a long time. Then, Ezra's first word was horse. "Not Mama or Papa?" "Horse." He saw my roan through the window and said horse, clear as day. Sarah cried, not because she was sad, because she said it meant our son was going to be a rancher, not a lawyer, and she'd lost the bet. "What bet?" "She bet me $5 our first child would follow her into books. I bet he'd follow me into cattle." His voice softened. "She owed me $5 when he died. I found the coins in her dresser after. She'd already set them aside." Ruth reached for his hand. He took it. His fingers were rough, scarred, warm. "I would have liked Sarah," Ruth said. "She would have liked you. She liked people who didn't quit. I wanted to quit. Every day for the last year, I wanted to quit. But you didn't." "No." "That's why she would have liked you." On day 7, a rider appeared on the southern road. Not Clem, not Mabel. A man Ruth didn't recognize, riding hard and alone. Josiah grabbed his rifle and went to the porch. The rider pulled up and dismounted. Young, dusty, breathing hard. "Mr. Hale?" "Who's askin'?" "Name's Tom Crane, Sheriff Crane's deputy. He sent me with a message." The young man caught his breath. "Judge Kell filed an emergency order this morning. Child welfare removal. He's claiming the fire proves the children are in danger, and he's got a territorial inspector coming tomorrow morning to evaluate the household." Ruth's legs went weak. She grabbed the porch rail. "On what grounds?" Josiah's voice was ice. "Unsafe living conditions. No adequate shelter for minors. History of violence on the property." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "It's all legal, Mr. Hale. The inspector's coming from Missoula, not one of Kell's people. But the judge wrote the order, and the order stands." "They're trying to take my children," Ruth said. The words came out like stones. "The sheriff wants you to know he'll be here tomorrow, too. Make sure the inspection's fair." The deputy mounted back up. "He also said to tell you, make the house look like a home, not a battlefield. Put the guns away. Put the family forward. Give the inspector nothing to find." He rode off. Ruth stood on the porch and felt the world tilt. "Ruth!" Josiah's hands on her shoulders. "Ruth, look at me. He's going to take them. While Clem is gone, he's going to take my babies." "Nobody's taking anybody." Josiah's voice was steel. "Listen to me. The house is clean. The girls are fed. We're married. This is a legal household with 2 parents and adequate shelter. An honest inspector won't find anything wrong. And if the inspector isn't honest, then we make sure every person who helped build that barn is here tomorrow to witness what happens. 15 people watching an inspection.
is 15 people who can testify if it goes wrong. Ruth looked at him through blurred eyes. What if it's not enough? It will be enough, because it has to be. He pulled her close. I promised you, Ruth. Nobody takes this family apart. Not fire, not judges, not anything. She let him hold her, let herself break, just for a moment, in the arms of a man who'd lost one family and was fighting with everything he had to keep another. Then she pulled herself together, dried her face on her sleeve, and went inside. She cleaned a house that was already clean. She organized a pantry that was already organized. She made Bertie and Opal take baths and put on the best clothes Clara Briggs had brought.
She baked bread because a house that smelled like bread was a house that said family and safety and permanence. And she prayed, not to God specifically, but to whatever force governed the universe of desperate mothers. She prayed that Clem was safe, that the inspector was honest, that the evidence would arrive in time, that the walls she and Josiah had built with their hands and their choices and their stubborn refusal to break would hold for one more day. Josiah found her at midnight, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded and her eyes dry. You should sleep, he said. Can't. He sat across from her. Me neither. Josiah? Yes? If they take the girls tomorrow, if the inspector rules against us, and they come with papers and authority, and there's nothing we can do, that won't happen. If it does, Ruth's voice was steady now. The terror had passed through her and come out the other side as something harder. If it does, I need you to know that these weeks, this time with you, it's the first time in my life I felt like a person instead of a problem. And whatever happens tomorrow, you gave me that. You gave my girls that. Ruth, and I need you to know one more thing. She reached across the table and took his hands. I love you. Not because of the contract, not because of the marriage certificate, not because you're protecting us. I love you because you held my daughter while she cried over kittens and you didn't look away. Because you see me, all of me, every pound, every scar, every broken thing, and you don't flinch. Josiah's hands tightened around hers. His jaw worked. His eyes, those winter river eyes, were bright with something he'd been holding back for weeks. I love you too, he said. I didn't think I could. Thought that part of me died with Sarah and Ezra. But you brought it back. You and those girls brought everything back. His voice broke. And I swear to you, Ruth, on my wife's grave and my son's memory, nobody takes this family tomorrow. Nobody takes it ever. I will burn this territory to the ground before I let that happen. No burning. Ruth squeezed his hands. We fight with paper and witnesses and the truth. That's what Clem's carrying to Helena. That's what wins this. And if truth isn't enough? Ruth stood, came around the table, sat in his lap, all 310 pounds of her, and felt him take her weight without hesitation, without strain, like he'd been waiting to carry her all along. Then we run, she said, together, all of us, and we start over somewhere the Kells can't reach. There's nowhere they can't reach. Then we run farther. He held her. She held him. Two broken people in a kitchen that smelled like bread and hope, waiting for dawn and whatever it would bring. The inspector arrived at 9. Sheriff Crane arrived at 8:30, and by some miracle Ruth would never fully understand, 12 of the ranchers who'd helped build the barn arrived at 8, lining the property like sentinels, not threatening, just present, just visible, just making it clear that whatever happened inside that house would be seen and remembered. Captain is satisfied, Opal said. Something twitched at the corner of Mrs. Pace's mouth. The inspection took 2 hours. Mrs. Pace checked food stores, water quality, sleeping arrangements, clothing.
She spoke to each girl privately. She spoke to Ruth privately. She spoke to Josiah privately. She noted the new barn going up, the workers on the property, the garden producing food. When she finished, she sat at the kitchen table and wrote her report in silence, while Ruth stood at the stove pretending to cook and actually dying. "Mrs. Hale," Mrs. Pace said finally. Ruth turned. "These children are well-nourished, adequately housed, and show no signs of abuse or neglect. Your household meets every standard set by the Territorial Welfare Code." She paused. "My report will reflect that." Ruth's knees buckled. She grabbed the counter. "However," Mrs. Pace stood, "I want you to understand that this filing will not stop Judge Kell from filing again. He can request another inspection in 30 days, and another after that. It's a legal mechanism designed to protect children, but it can be weaponized by anyone with the authority to file." "I understand," Ruth said. "Do you?" Mrs. Pace looked at her over her spectacles. "Because I've seen this pattern before. A powerful man filing repeated complaints against a family he wants to control. It doesn't end with inspections. It ends with the family breaking or the powerful man being stopped." She picked up her bag. "I can't tell you which outcome to expect, but I can tell you that my reports are thorough, honest, and filed with the Territorial Governor's Office, not the District Court." She left. Ruth sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Not quietly, not with dignity. Great heaving sobs that shook her whole body, relief and terror and exhaustion pouring out in equal measure. Josiah found her there. He sat down beside her on the floor, his back against the cabinet, and let her cry against his shoulder until there was nothing left. "She passed us," Ruth managed. "I heard. Clem's been gone 8 days. "I know." 2 more days. If she's on schedule, 2 more days. "She'll make it." Ruth wiped her face, looked at this man sitting on a kitchen floor with his arm around a woman twice the size most men wanted, in a house built for ghosts, surrounded by the ashes of everything the world had tried to take from them. "I love you," she said again. Because it was true. Because saying it felt like building something. Because every time she said it, the walls got thicker and the foundation got deeper and the kells got smaller. "I love you too." Josiah kissed her forehead. "Now get off this floor. We've got a barn to finish and a family to protect. And your daughter's coming home in 2 days with enough evidence to bury a judge." Ruth got up. Josiah got up. They went back to work. Because that was what you did when the world tried to break you. You stood up. You kept building. And you refused, with every breath in your body, to let the bastards win. And 2 days later, when a wagon appeared on the southern road carrying an old woman and a 14-year-old girl with fire in her eyes and a federal marshal's seal on the documents in her hands, Ruth stood on the porch and watched her daughter come home and knew with the bone-deep certainty of a mother who'd been through hell and climbed back out, that the fight was almost won. Almost. But not yet. Clem jumped from the wagon before it stopped. She hit the ground running, and Ruth caught her, pulled her in, held her so tight the girl couldn't breathe. "I'm okay, Mama. I'm okay." 10 days, Ruth's voice broke. 10 days, Clementine. "I know. I'm sorry. The roads were bad after the rain and we had to—" "I don't care about the roads." Ruth pulled back and held her daughter's face. Thinner, sun-browned, eyes bright with something that looked like triumph. "Did you make it?" "I made it." Clem reached inside her coat and pulled out a folded document with a red seal. Federal Marshal Arthur Grimes. He read everything, every page. Took him 6 hours. And when he finished, he looked at me and said, "How old are you, girl?" And I said, "Old enough to read, sir." And he said, Well, you just read a judge right out of his seat. Josiah took the document and read it on the porch while Ruth held Clem and Bertie showed her sister every new development. Phoenix was bigger. Cleopatra had caught a snake. Opal had taught Captain to say grace, which was really just Opal saying grace in a different voice. Ruth? Josiah's voice was quiet. She looked up. His face had gone very still. The marshal is coming. Personally. With 6 federal deputies. They'll be here in 4 days.
4 days, Ruth said. 4 days. And he's bringing warrants. For Judge Kell? For Leland?
For 8 of their men. Fraud, extortion, abuse of judicial authority, arson. He looked at the paper again, like he couldn't believe what was written on it. And a restraining order, barring both Kells from any contact with our family, our property, or any person connected to our household.
It's over?
Bertie whispered. Not yet. Clem's voice cut through the hope. 4 days is a long time. If the Kells find out the marshal is coming, they'll run. Or they'll come here first and try to destroy the evidence before the warrants are served. The evidence is in Helena, Josiah said. Copies of it. But the originals are still in the house. Sarah's papers, the tax records, the trust documents. Clem looked at all of them. If the Kells burn this house before the marshal arrives, it's our word against a judge's, and judges win that fight. Silence on the porch. Then Josiah said, "We move the papers." Where? Root cellar, stone walls, heavy door. It survived the barn fire. It'll survive anything short of dynamite. They moved everything that night. Every paper, every document, every piece of Sarah's careful record-keeping, wrapped in oilcloth and locked in the root cellar. Josiah hid the key under a stone that only he and Ruth and Clem knew about. Now we wait, he said. They didn't have to wait long. Leland Kell rode up the next afternoon. Not with 6 men this time, not with lawyers or legal papers. Alone. On his black stallion, with a white handkerchief tied to the barrel of his rifle, like a flag of truce. Josiah met him at the property line, with his own rifle, and no flag. That's close enough. Leland reined in. He looked different. The emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by something worse. Desperation. The look of a man who'd felt the ground shift under his feet and was scrambling for purchase. I need to talk to you, Hale. Talk. Not like this. Leland glanced at the workers still building the barn, at Ruth on the porch, at Clem in the doorway. Privately. Anything you say to me, you say in front of my wife. Leland's jaw tightened. Then he nodded. Fine. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. My father sent me. He wants to make a deal. Your father can rot. He's offering to drop every complaint, every lawsuit, every filing against your property. Full withdrawal. In writing. Leland swallowed. He'll also pay for the barn. Full replacement cost. And he'll sign over the water rights dispute permanently. Ruth came down from the porch. What does he want in return? The papers. Leland looked at her, and for the first time, Ruth saw something human behind those empty eyes. Fear. Real animal fear. Whatever your daughter found in those trunks. Whatever she took to Helena. My father wants it back. All of it. It's too late for that, Clem said from the doorway. Leland's head snapped toward her. What do you mean? I mean the federal marshal has the evidence, has had it for 3 days. Your father's not making a deal, Leland. He's trying to bury a body that's already been found. The color drained from Leland's face. Ruth watched it happen. Watched the fear overwhelm whatever mask he'd been wearing. Watched the calculation and the cruelty peel away
until all that was left was a 28-year-old man who just realized his father's empire was falling, and he was standing in the wreckage. "You're lying." "I don't lie," Clem said. "I read." Leland turned to Josiah. "Call her off. Make a deal. My father has connections. The governor, the territorial legislature, people who can make this go away." "Nobody can make this go away," Josiah said. "Your father stole land from 11 families. He burned my barn. He tried to take my wife's children. And now a federal marshal is riding here with warrants that have your name on them too." He stepped closer. "So here's my deal. You ride back to your father, you tell him what's coming, and you both surrender to Sheriff Crane before the marshal arrives. It'll go easier if you do." "Easier," Leland laughed, but it was a broken sound. "You want me to turn myself in to save you the trouble. I want you to save yourself the trouble, because if the marshal has to come get you, it won't be polite." Leland stared at him, at Ruth, at Clem, at the half-built barn and the workers who'd stopped to watch, and the house that should have been empty by now, but wasn't, because a fat woman and her 3 daughters had filled it with something the Kells couldn't buy or burn or bully away. "My father won't surrender," Leland said quietly. "Then your father will run, and they'll catch him anyway." "And me?" "That's your choice. First one you've made for yourself, I reckon." Leland mounted his horse. His hands shook on the reins. He looked at Ruth one more time, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Not hatred. Envy. The envy of a man who'd never been loved, looking at a woman who was. He rode off without another word. "He'll tell his father," Clem said. "I know." "They'll run." "Probably." "And if they don't run? If they come here instead?" Josiah looked at Ruth. She looked back. 3 weeks ago, he'd asked her to take the girls and run if violence came. She'd promised. But promises made in fear and promises made in love were different animals. And Ruth had changed since that night. "If they come here," Ruth said, "they'll find a family that doesn't break." They came at dawn on the 3rd day. Not Leland alone, not with a flag. Judge Ambrose Kell rode at the front of 12 armed men, his silver hair wild, his expensive coat stained with road dust, and his face wearing the expression of a man who'd decided that if his empire was falling, he'd bring everyone down with him. Ruth saw them from the kitchen window. She didn't scream, didn't freeze. She walked to the stairs and called up, calm and clear. "Girls, root cellar, now!" Bertie came down with Phoenix in her arms and Cleopatra at her heels. Opal came with Captain. Clem came last, carrying the lockbox where she'd stored copies of every document. "Mama," Clem started, "go with your sisters." "I'm not leaving you." "Clementine Dawson Hale." Ruth used the new name, the married name, the name that meant family and law and a bond no judge could break. "You did your part. You saved this family with your brain and your courage, and I have never been prouder of anything in my life. Now go into that cellar and protect your sisters. That is your job. Let me do mine." Clem's eyes filled. She grabbed Ruth, hugged her so hard it hurt, then took Bertie and Opal and ran for the root cellar. Ruth walked out the front door. Josiah was already on the porch, rifle in his hands. Harlan Briggs and 4 other ranchers were spread across the yard, armed and grim. Sheriff Crane sat on his horse at the edge of the property line, his deputies behind him. Judge Kell reined in 50 yards from the house. "Hale, Judge, I'm here to reclaim property that was stolen from my household. Documents removed illegally from public records. Those documents were private papers belonging to my late wife. They were never public records. And they're currently in the custody of Federal Marshal Arthur Grimes, who's riding here right now with warrants for your arrest. I don't recognize federal authority over a territorial matter. The federal government disagrees. Sheriff Crane rode forward. Judge Kell, I'm asking you to stand down. Dismount. Surrender your weapons. I'll hold you in my custody until the marshal arrives. Your custody? Kell laughed. You've been under my authority for 15 years, Crane. You think you can arrest me? I think I have to. Crane's hand rested on his gun. And I think these 12 men behind you know that firing on a sheriff and his deputies is a hanging offense. So I'm asking them too. Stand down. Nobody needs to die today. Kell's men shifted in their saddles. Ruth could see the calculation on their faces. Loyalty to the judge versus the reality of federal warrants and a sheriff with legal authority. One by one, she watched them do the math. The first man holstered his gun and rode away. Then a second. Then 3 more. The line behind Kell thinned like sand through fingers until only Leland and 2 others remained. Leland, Kell snapped, hold your position. Leland sat on his black stallion and looked at his father, then at the ranch, at Ruth standing on the porch in her dead woman's blue dress. 310 pounds of stubbornness and love, unarmed, unafraid, and unbroken. No, father, Leland said. What? No. Leland unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop to the dirt. It's over. It's been over since that girl read our books better than our lawyers did. He dismounted slowly. I'm done. Kell's face went purple. He turned his horse toward Leland, then toward Crane, then toward Josiah, searching for someone to fight, someone to blame, someone to crush. But there was no one left. His empire had dissolved in the space of 10 minutes, bled dry by a 14-year-old girl's literacy and a dead woman's filing system. You'll regret this, Kell said. All of you. I built this valley. I made it what it is. You stole it. Ruth's voice carried across the yard. You stole land from families who trusted you. You burned a barn to scare a woman into giving up her children. You used the law like a weapon against people who couldn't fight back. She walked down the porch steps, every eye on her. But you couldn't steal this ranch, and you couldn't break this family, because we had something you never counted on. And what's that? Kell sneered. Each other. Sheriff Crane dismounted and walked toward the judge. Ambrose Kell, I'm placing you under arrest on charges of fraud, extortion, and arson, pending federal warrants from Marshal Grimes. Kell didn't resist. In the end, he went quietly. Like all tyrants who discover that power built on fear evaporates the moment people stop being afraid. They took him away. They took Leland, who went with his head down and his hands open, looking more relieved than defeated. Ruth walked to the root cellar and knocked. Phoenix says it's safe. The door opened. Birdie came out first, blinking in the sunlight, Phoenix mewing in her arms. Opal followed, holding Captain up to survey the yard like a general inspecting a battlefield. And Clem came last, standing in the doorway, with tears streaming down her face and the lockbox still clutched against her chest. Is it over? Clem whispered. It's over, baby. Ruth pulled her close. You did it. You saved us. We saved us, Clem said. All of us. Josiah came across the yard. He put his rifle down, and Ruth saw his hands were shaking again. Not from cold, not from adrenaline, from the overwhelming, terrifying relief of a man who'd just watched the walls hold. Opal ran to him, grabbed his leg, looked up with those enormous eyes. Papa, she said, first time, just like that. No ceremony, no build-up, just a 5-year-old choosing a word for the man who'd earned it. Josiah dropped to his knees, His face crumbled. Every wall, every stone, every year of grief and isolation and punishing himself for a family he couldn't save, all of it broke at once. He pulled Opal against his chest and held her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. "Yeah," he said, his voice wrecked. "Yeah, Poppy. Opal. I'm here." Bertie joined, then Clem, still crying. And Ruth wrapped her arms around all of them. This impossible family, built from ash and auction blocks and $2 and the stubborn refusal to let the world decide their worth. The federal marshal arrived the next day. Warrants were served. Evidence was reviewed. Within a month, Judge Ambrose Kell was stripped of his seat and indicted on 14 counts of fraud and judicial corruption. Leland pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony against his father. The Bitterroot Land Trust was dissolved, and 11 ranches were returned to the families Kell had stolen them from. Mabel Thorne stood on her store porch and watched the proceedings with the satisfaction of a woman who'd waited 20 years for justice and had finally seen it delivered by a 60-year-old shopkeeper and a 14-year-old girl. The barn was finished on a Tuesday in September. Every rancher in the valley came for the raising of the last beam. Ruth cooked for 40 people, and Bertie introduced every single one of them to Phoenix, who had grown fat and orange and insufferably smug. Opal gave a speech that was mostly addressed to Captain, but included a section thanking Josiah for, quote, being big and scary at the right times. Clem didn't give a speech. She sat on the porch and read a law book Mabel had ordered from a catalog in Chicago. When Ruth asked what she was studying, Clem said, "Territorial Precedent for Child Advocacy Law." "You're 14. I'll be 15 in March, then 16, then 18. And when I'm 18, I'm going to take the territorial bar exam and become the first female lawyer in Montana." She looked up from her book. "And then, I'm going to make sure no judge ever does to another family what Kell did to ours." Ruth sat beside her. "Your father would be proud of you." "Which one?" The question caught Ruth off guard. Clem was looking at Josiah, who was across the yard helping Domingo repair a fence. Opal on his shoulders, Bertie at his heels. "Both," Ruth said. "No," Clem shook her head. "Hector wouldn't be proud of me. He wouldn't understand any of this. But Josiah—" She stopped. "He read every document with me. He stayed up until midnight helping me write that letter. He trusted me to ride to Helena when everyone else said I was too young." Her voice was soft. "That's a father. Not the one who gave me blood. The one who gave me belief." Ruth put her arm around her daughter, and they sat there, watching the man who'd built a house for ghosts learn to fill it with the living. That winter, Ruth told Josiah about the baby. She did it at the kitchen table, over coffee, in the matter-of-fact way she handled everything that terrified her. "I'm pregnant." Josiah set down his cup, picked it up, set it down again. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "How far?" 2 months, maybe. Hard to tell." He sat very still. Ruth watched him and saw every emotion cross his face like weather across the mountains. Shock, fear, joy, grief, hope. And underneath it all, the trembling disbelief of a man who'd been given something he'd stopped praying for. "Are you scared?" she asked. Terrified. "Me too." But also, he reached across the table and took her hand. Also grateful. For you. For the girls. For this. He pressed her hand against his chest. "I didn't think I'd get another chance, Ruth. Didn't think I deserved one." "You don't get what you deserve. You get what you build." She stood, came around the table, and sat in his lap. He took her weight. Always did. Always would.
And we've built something worth having." He kissed her, slow and sweet and full of everything they'd earned. The fire and the fear and the $2 that started it all, and the stubborn, ridiculous, impossible love that grew from it.
Spring came to the Bitterroot Valley the way it always did. Sudden, green, fierce with life. Ruth stood in the garden Sarah had planted, her hands in the dirt, her belly round under the blue dress she'd sewn from a dead woman's fabric. Josiah was teaching Bertie to ride. Opal was explaining ranch management to Captain. Clem sat on the porch with a law book and a cup of coffee, looking for all the world like the woman she was becoming. And Phoenix, the cat who'd survived the fire, slept in a patch of sunlight on the windowsill, fat and orange, and proof that some things endure. Ruth Ella Dawson had been sold at auction for $2. She'd been mocked, starved, degraded, and told she was worth nothing by a world that measured women by the size of their waists and the money in their hands. But Ruth Ella Hale, wife, mother, partner, survivor, had built a family from ashes, brought down a corrupt judge with a 14-year-old girl and a dead woman's filing system, and turned a house full of ghosts into a home full of life. She pressed her hands into the earth and felt the garden pushing back, alive, growing, reaching for the sun. That was the truth about worth, she thought. It wasn't what people paid for you. It wasn't the number on a scale, or the size of a dress, or the balance in an account. It was what you grew in the dirt they buried you under. It was what you built from the fire they set. It was the family you chose, and the love you earned, and the ground you refused to surrender, no matter how many times the world tried to take it. Ruth stood up, brushed the soil from her knees, and walked inside to cook dinner for her family. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.